year was 1415. On the wind-swept coast of Morocco, Portuguese banners snapped in the salty air. Soldiers, priests, and princes gazed upon the fortress city of Ceuta, newly taken from the Moors. Few could have known that this moment, the capture of a single city, was the spark of something far greater. From this humble beginning, the small kingdom of Portugal, perched on the western edge of Europe, would reach out across the oceans. Guided by curiosity, greed, faith, and ambition, Portuguese ships would chart the coasts of Africa, cross into Asia, and claim vast new lands in South America. For over 3 centuries, the Portuguese would build a global empire, the first of its kind. Stretching from Brazil to India, Angola to Macau, Goa to Mozambique. They were traders, conquerors, missionaries, and explorers. Their legacy would shape the modern world. This is the story of Portugal's global empire. Its rise, its glory, and its eventual decline. Portugal in the early 1400s was small, poor, and vulnerable. Hemmed in by Castile to the east and the Atlantic Ocean to the west, it had few choices. But Portugal possessed something rare, a vision, and a leader who dared to chase it. Prince Henry the Navigator. Though he rarely sailed himself, Henry dreamed of pushing beyond the known world. He believed wealth, knowledge, and souls for Christ lay beyond the horizon. Under his patronage, Portuguese sailors began inching down the coast of Africa. They brought back not only maps and knowledge, but also gold, ivory, and enslaved people. Soon, forts and trading posts dotted the shoreline. Argan, Elmina, São Jorge de Mina. Portugal was carving its first empire, not on land, but on the sea. By 1488, Bartolomeu Dias had rounded the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. A decade later, Vasco da Gama reached India itself, his ships heavy with spices on their return. The riches stunned Europe. Spices, silks, and precious stones poured into Lisbon. Portugal was no longer a poor kingdom. It was becoming the center of a global trade network. Africa was both the gateway and the backbone of Portugal's empire. Along the coasts of West Africa, the Portuguese established feuderias, fortified trading posts. These were not colonies in the traditional sense, but hubs of commerce, where Africans and Portuguese exchanged goods. Gold from Guinea flowed into Lisbon, enriching the crown. But with this trade came something darker. By the mid-15th century, the Portuguese were exporting enslaved Africans to Europe and, later, to Brazil and the Caribbean. The Atlantic slave trade had begun, and Portugal was its pioneer. In Angola and Mozambique, Portugal dug deeper. Here, they established stronger footholds, blending military force with alliances. Missionaries spread Christianity, while soldiers enforced Portuguese power. In some places, Portuguese men married into local elites, creating communities of mixed heritage that still exist today. Yet Africa was not conquered easily. Beyond the coasts, African kingdoms like Congo and Ndongo resisted fiercely, negotiating, fighting, and reshaping the balance of power. The Portuguese Empire in Africa was never absolute. It was a network of fragile outposts, always vulnerable to resistance and rival European powers. If Africa was the gateway, Asia was the prize. In 1498, Vasco da Gama's arrival in India shattered centuries of Muslim and Venetian control of the spice trade. Within a generation, Portugal had seized key ports along the Indian Ocean. The Portuguese strategy was clear: control the choke points, and you control the trade. In 1510, they captured Goa, which became the capital of their Asian empire. In 1511, they stormed Malacca, the gateway to the Spice Islands. In 1515, they seized Hormuz, commanding the Persian Gulf. And in 1557, they established a permanent settlement in Macau, opening a door to China. The Portuguese ships, heavily armed carracks and caravels, dominated the seas. Their Carrera de India, or India Run, was the backbone of empire, fleets sailing yearly from Lisbon to Goa and back, carrying spices worth fortunes. But the Portuguese in Asia were not only traders. They were also missionaries. Jesuits like Francis Xavier preached in India, Japan, and beyond, dreaming of winning millions of souls for Christ. In some places, like Goa, Christianity took deep root. In others, the Portuguese remained outsiders, tolerated, resented, or resisted. Asia made Portugal rich. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and silk transformed Lisbon into one of the wealthiest cities in Europe. Yet this wealth came at a price. Endless conflict with Ottoman fleets, Arab merchants, Indian rulers, and eventually, rival Europeans. While Asia glittered with spices, Portugal's greatest prize lay across the Atlantic: Brazil. In 1500, the Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral landed on the coast of South America. At first, the land seemed a curiosity, valuable only for its red dye wood, pau-Brazil. But soon, settlers realized Brazil offered more. Much more. The tropical climate was perfect for sugar cane. And sugar, in the 16th century, was as valuable as gold. Plantations spread across Brazil, worked by enslaved Africans shipped across the Atlantic in growing numbers. The wealth was staggering. By the 1600s, Brazil was the largest producer of sugar in the world. Later, gold and diamonds were discovered in Minas Gerais, drawing fortune seekers and slaves alike. Brazil became the jewel of the Portuguese crown, the foundation of its empire in the Americas. But Brazil was also contested. French interlopers tried to settle there. Dutch fleets seized parts of the northeast in the 1600s. Native peoples resisted fiercely, from the Tupi to the Guarani. Yet over time, Portuguese culture, language, and Catholicism spread, weaving Brazil into the fabric of the empire. By the 17th century, the Portuguese empire stretched across the globe. Yet it was fragile. Portugal itself was small, with a population of barely a million. Its empire was vast, but thinly manned. Garrisoning forts from Brazil to Macau strained its resources. Rival powers smelled weakness. The Dutch, newly independent from Spain, launched attacks across the empire, seizing forts in Africa, dominating spice islands in Indonesia, and briefly holding parts of Brazil. The English and French, too, pressed against Portuguese holdings. At home, Portugal itself endured crisis. From 1580 to 1640, the kingdom was united with Spain under one crown. In this Iberian Union, Portugal's empire became a target for Spain's enemies, dragging the Portuguese into conflicts they could not win. Though Portugal regained its independence in 1640, the damage was done. Much of the Asian Empire was lost to the Dutch and English. The Portuguese retreated to a handful of strongholds: Goa, Macau, Timor. Only Brazil and parts of Africa remained firmly in Portuguese hands. By the 18th century, Portugal's empire had changed. It was no longer the global master of trade. That crown now belonged to the Dutch and the British. But Portugal still clung to its colonies, especially Brazil, which remained the engine of wealth. In 1822, Brazil declared independence, ending 3 centuries of Portuguese rule. It was a devastating loss. The jewel of the empire gone. Yet Portugal held on to African colonies like Angola and Mozambique, and to Asian outposts like Goa, Macau, and East Timor. These fragments of empire lasted astonishingly long. Goa remained Portuguese until 1961. Macau until 1999. The Portuguese language, spread by merchants, soldiers, and missionaries, became the bond of millions. Today, Portuguese is spoken by more than 250 million people across 4 continents. From Lisbon to Rio de Janeiro, from Luanda to Maputo. Portugal's empire was the first truly global empire. It was built not by vast armies, but by daring sailors, powerful ships, and a relentless hunger for trade. It brought together continents, for better and for worse. It spread knowledge, faith, and language. But it also spread slavery, exploitation, and violence. From Ceuta in 1415 to Macau in 1999, the Portuguese story spanned nearly 6 centuries. The empire rose and fell, but its mark on the world remains. And it all began with a small kingdom on the edge of Europe, looking out at the endless sea, and daring to sail beyond the horizon.